Howdy neighbors, David here. And today on Boondock Stallions, we are still doing 31 days of Halloween, and it is day 4, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. Technically, this was supposed to be yesterday's movie, but I'm doing some back-to-back work today. So I just got done watching not just Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but I also watched Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and I'll get back to why I did that here in a few minutes. But we're also going to do Hellraiser here in a little bit after I go to the store and get something for dinner. So before we get started, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe. Dream Warriors, probably the best of all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies in the main franchise. And I say the main franchise because that honor could also fall on Wes Craven's New Nightmare. But technically, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, isn't a sequel to the rest of the franchise. It's a movie about the movie and doesn't have any place in the Prime timeline. So the Nightmare on Elm Street series ends with Freddy's dead. And so, having said that, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is the absolute best in the overall Prime timeline. Now, about a year and a half ago, I made 2 videos. Well, the first video I made was about a viewing order that would cut the original Nightmare on Elm Street series into a trilogy. My original idea was to just watch Nightmare on Elm Street 1, 3, and Freddy's Dead and use the rules of the Scream movies to make them fall into trilogy order, and it worked out pretty well. And then a viewer who saw the video commented that you could also do the same thing, but sub out Freddy's Dead for Wes Craven's New Nightmare, so I made a second video about that. I'll leave a card or a link down in the comments. But the way it works is Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 3 would serve as the first 2 in the trilogy, and they work exactly how they're supposed to. Nightmare on Elm Street 1 follows the rules of a horror movie. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 follows the rules of a sequel, and then if you cut out 4 and 5, because 2, 4, and 5 were not the best of the movies, even though technically 4 made the most money. 4 only made the most money because it was banking on the success of Part 3, which it failed to live up to. Not that I'm complaining about the movie. I love all of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but as far as it goes, that's pretty much how that ended up happening in the first place. So then you get to Freddy's Dead, and if you follow trilogy rules, number 1, forget the past. Anything you think you know about the past is over and done with, and that's pretty true. It goes back and shows you that Freddy was actually married, and Freddy had a kid, and that the house on Elm Street was in fact his house, because that right there is an interesting point, because everybody associates the iconic house from A Nightmare on Elm Street as Freddy's house, but there is actually no mention anywhere in the first 5 movies that Freddy ever lived in that house pre-being burned alive. That was something that we all just assumed or made up, or it was a fan theory, or Lord only knows how that came to be. But it wasn't until Freddy's Dead that you actually found out that that was the house that he lived in. And it makes sense that they would have trouble selling it once you find out that he strangled his wife in the backyard in front of his daughter. So property value on that bad boy would have gone way down. And so, like I said, showing you things about the past that you thought were true that weren't actually true. And it lets you know that that's how he got caught. We were all aware that, the search warrant wasn't signed in the right place from what Marge Thompson told us in the first movie, and that's how Freddy got off on a technicality. But who broke the case? Who was the first person to realize that it was Freddy that was doing it? And then you find out that it was his daughter that turned him in. And so you finally get those answers. And it really does nicely tie up trilogy form. Freddy is stronger, as the killer should be in this movie, because they should have superhuman strength. And what we find out is that Freddy, in fact, feeds off of fear and souls. That's how he gets stronger and stronger. In the first movie, he needed to make sure that he could, in fact, kill Tina. So he scared her and got her so good in the nightmare that he was able to cut through her nightgown at the beginning of the movie to Wow, I really got off topic from talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but don't worry, we're going to circle back to it. Anyways, Tina's nightgown. So Freddy cuts Tina's nightgown, and that is the first act of touching the physical world that Freddy is able to do. And then through that bit of fear that he's created, he makes Tina his first victim. And the fear that he creates in Rod when he kills Tina makes Rod his second victim, and so on and so forth. And then he just continues to get stronger. Nancy even comments on it in Nightmare on Elm Street 3 when they've gone to attack him to save Joey. She stabs him through the chest with a poker in the dream, and he shrugs it off like it's nothing. And she comments that he's never been this strong, and that's when he cuts his shirt open, and you see all the faces and souls that he's collected over the years, giving him his power. And then you get to Freddy's dead, and you get to physically see it. When he kills somebody, their soul leaves their body to go into Freddy. Now, also, interestingly enough, in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, we're introduced to the drug Hypnocil. It's what Nancy is taking so that she can suppress her Freddy dreams. But check this out. They are a placebo. They do not work. Even if you want to take into account the events of Freddy versus Jason, and I will, there's even more proof that the Hypnocil doesn't actually work, because you come to find out in Freddy's Dead that Freddy cannot leave Springwood. Ha! Springwood! Do you hear that, Mark? Springwood. I was talking to my best friend about this earlier today, and I kept saying Springfield instead of Springwood, and I remembered to get it right this time. Anywho, so you know that Freddy can't leave Springwood, and unless he's in his daughter's head, that's how he leaves in Freddy's Dead. So when Nancy goes off to college, Hypnocil or not, she wouldn't actually have to worry about Freddy, because he's back home where he cannot get to her. So the Hypnocil wasn't actually working, and proof of that is even further, goes further in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, because she's still on Hypnocil when she goes to work at the hospital. But Kirsten pulls her into the dream, and boom, Freddy is there, and she is a little out of her element and has to run and hide. So the Hypnocil didn't actually work as well as you'd think it would. And then they even make mention of it in Freddy versus Jason. All the kids are on Hypnocil while they're locked up in the psychiatric hospital. But here's the thing. One, that hospital is supposed to still be the same hospital that they were locked up in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but it's not. It is out of town, right? They even make mention of it, how it is out of town, still in the same county, but in a completely different city. So they being on Hypnocil didn't matter, because they weren't in Springwood for Freddy to get them. And then once they were back in town, you can say, well, they stopped taking their meds once they left the mental institution. But yeah, they were also back in Springwood. The Hypnocil was a placebo. The world is a lie. We're living in the Matrix. And the fact that Lawrence Fishburne is in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is further proof that that's probably where he was when Morpheus was woken up from the Matrix. I'm just kidding. You might even think that that's a version of him in the Nightmare Matrix, but it's not. The version of Morpheus in the Nightmare Matrix is in Pee-wee's Playhouse. That's right. If you're old enough to remember that, go, wow. So the Hypnocil is a placebo. It doesn't really work because Freddy can't leave town, and everybody that's on it is out of town. So, haha, I debunk that whole thing. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. And now, so I just watched New Nightmare after A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 because I wanted to do the trilogy thing. And I know I don't have to watch the first one. I've seen it a gajillion times. And technically, I could redo the whole thing in my head if I wanted to. I just enjoy watching the movies. So I watched Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and it still holds up. Following trilogy rules. Rule number 1, forget the past. Everything you think you know about the past is irrelevant. And this is more true than ever because it turns out that everything you knew about Freddy was in a movie series, and now we are in the real world having to deal with the actors who starred in that movie. The killer is stronger than he ever was before. This is also true because technically it's not Freddy. It is an old evil spirit entity thing on the planet that has taken on the identity of Freddy and therefore has decided to leave the horror films and affect real life. And his power even grows like Freddy's. At the very beginning of the movie, when they're doing the whole scene with the robot arm in Nancy's nightmare, in Heather Langenkamp's nightmare, glitches and cuts her boyfriend's fingers. And then when you wake up, he has the same cuts on his fingers. That was Freddy testing the waters to make sure that he could, in fact, affect the physical world just like he did in the movie. It's all very cohesive. It works. It repeats itself, and there's a very good bit of logic behind how it even works. And so, um, and like with all other trilogies, all bets are off. Anybody can die, and the fact that Heather Langenkamp and her son were the two main victims of the story, they also could have perished, and this would have been for real. There would have been like no, okay, cut, print, kill the pig, and everybody's rinses off the fake blood and goes home. This was for real. Nancy could have actually physically, Heather could have actually died. So let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm going to let y'all go because I'm getting a little hoarse and a little hungry, and I want to go and get ready to watch Hellraiser and live stream later tonight. Be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.